back, everybody, to the Fretboard Journal podcast. I'm your host, Jason Verlinde. As always, that's John Rauhaus playing in the background. Today on the show, I'm talking to UK-based author John Stubbings. John has been on this podcast before. He was our guest on episode 305, for anyone who's really into those deep cuts. Back then, he was talking to us about the book, The Devil is in It, that he had written about guitar culture. Well, John is back with an equally impressive book, The Guitar Detective. This is a quote-unquote nonfiction novel. I asked John all about that. And for all of you out there who love that the Fretboard Journal spares no expense on printing or photography, for those of you out there who love collecting rare and cool books, this is completely up your alley. This is a labor of love like few others. It's a beautiful hardcover book, printed exquisitely. This is not some trashy novel that you buy at the airport. This is a beautiful, and I mean truly beautiful by every standard of book collecting imaginable, novel in a hardcover format with beautiful illustrations and photographs and just exquisitely typeset. Really, John spared no expense. So I wanted to hear all about the making of this book. I love it when people are so passionate about writing and guitar that they just go down these crazy rabbit holes and create these beautiful, exquisite products, whether they are guitars themselves or things like these books that John is doing. We hear all about it. Speaking of beautiful things, I am happy to announce that a bunch of you have been opening your mailbox and seeing the new Fretboard Journal 58 in there. So we'll be spilling the beans on that next week once most of you have it. But if you haven't subscribed yet, if you want to be a part of the Fretboard Journal family, go to fretboardjournal.com, click on the subscribe button. So many great stories in this issue. Mac DeMarco, I got to interview him. Chris Thiele's in this issue. There is just so much meaty content from so many artists that I truly love. I think you will love it too. So go check that out. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Peghead Nation, my favorite online guitar instruction portal around, but they also teach banjo and mandolin. Use the discount code Fretboard and you'll get your first month free. And you can learn from so many of the names you've heard on this podcast, folks you've read about in the magazine. It really is your one-stop shop for all things Americana, bluegrass, folk music. We're also brought to you by our friends at Stringjoy Strings down in Nashville, Tennessee. They are creating guitar, banjo, and mandolin strings now, and their guitar strings I personally use all the time. I love them. I think you will too, acoustic and electric. They can also do custom sets. Last but not least, Mike and Mike's Guitar Bar here in Seattle, Washington is sponsoring the show. Go say hi. Tell them the Fretboard Journal sent you. And our 2026 Fretboard Summit, we're going to have some pretty big announcements in about a month. And I want you to get in before we do those because it may very well sell out quickly. Go to fretboardsummit.org, click on that register button. It's in Chicago. It's August 20th to 22nd, 2026. And I promise you all, if you have been listening to this podcast, if you've been reading the magazine, if you've been reading our email newsletter, you will absolutely love the Fretboard Summit. And one of the people who loved the summit was John Stubbings, today's guest. I hope you enjoy my conversation with him. John, welcome.
Thank you. It's been a while since I've seen you.
It's been a while since I've seen you. Lots of guitars in the background, including some that aren't even finished.
No, they're replacement tops.
Okay.
I tell you what, one of those is the Dana Bourgeois toasted top that I did in the workshop at the very first summit. Do you remember that?
Of course I remember that.
I remember you walking through the room, as you say, looking terrified, thinking, how am I keeping all these plates up in the air at the same time? But
this is a common feeling at the Fretboard Summit, but somehow it always works.
Yeah, I know it's like the bumblebee. It shouldn't fly, but heck, somehow it does.
There you go.
Best not to ask or to wonder why, just accept that it does.
I love it. So the last time we spoke, you put out this incredible book on guitar culture, guitar collecting. And I think that was an easy enough project for people to wrap their heads around, especially people in our community who live and breathe this stuff. You just came out with a second book, which a little harder to wrap your head around, a nonfiction novel. I mean, even if we didn't even talk about guitars, I think you need to explain what that means.
Yeah. Well, it's an awkward term, I'll admit. And I suppose I got to it because when I'd finished publishing The Devil Is In It, I had this pile of stuff, stories, interviews, photographs, receipts, airline tickets, and they're all sitting there. And I thought, well, these aren't the leftovers. They're not the bits on the cutting room floor. These are great stories. And some of them were interviews, some of them were stuff I got from talking to people. And I thought I suppose naively, I thought there's another book in here, but I'm not too sure what this book is. I knew it wasn't going to be The Devil Is In It Part 2. But I thought it's sort of more than that. And also I've sort of had a feeling that there is so much great stuff in here and it deserves an airing. But if, having reread it and gone through it, I thought, well, if The Devil Was In It was about how did the guitar become so famous, so important, so dominant? Why did it, supersede anything that the banjo could have done, or, with all due respect to banjo players, or the ukulele? The mass of this material, I think, was why the guitar became popular, why the guitar became so important. And it's that thing that is the relationship we have with the guitar. And you talk to people, and it's that old story, which is, oh, I bought this guitar and it's got some tunes in it, and I want to try and lift these tunes out. But also, it's so important to people. And I had this thing that when I was in my probably 20s, there was a guitar in a music shop that was hanging high on the wall that the guy just wouldn't sell. And he sort of had a reason, which was it was going to be worth a lot of money, but he had other stories about it. So I started thinking, well, maybe I should tell the story of that guitar. And I just started doing more and more research. And I had this story about this guitar. And it struck me that I didn't want to tell it in a linear way. I wanted to tell it in a novelistic way. And so when I was selling, or people were buying The Devil Is In It, because of the unique way I sold it, which was that people wrote to me and they handed over quite a lot of dollars, and they trusted me. The book had never been published. I was absolutely an unknown entity. You'd very kindly told the story of it, and the fact that I bumped into, or I approached you at that first summit. And as you said, lots of people say, oh, I've got this project, I'm doing this. And you usually don't hear from them again. They disappear. Sure. But I bounced back 5 years later and said, hey, I finished it. I did it. And those people who bought the book, I wasn't just an independent author, I was an independent book publisher. And so I had a unique relationship with people. They wrote to me and said, can I have a book? I wrote back and said, yes, you can have 184. And they wrote back to me and said, oh, that's great. I'm buying it for my husband, or we're getting it for my son, or I'm buying it. And of the 500 people who bought books, probably about 50 just bought a book, and I didn't hear from them again. Okay. But about 450 wrote back to me and said, hey, I got the book. Oh, it's great. I mean, I remember one memorable woman said, I got the book. It was wrapped better and packaged better than guitars I've bought online. I can't believe the amount of love you've put into the wrapping of it. And I then started a dialogue with people, and that continues to today. And one of the most remarkable things was, I'm taking a sip of water, was that people wrote to me and told me how they were reading the book. And a lot of them said, well, I started reading it and then I realized I'm going to get through this quite quickly and I don't want it to end. So they came up with this. A lot of them said, what I do is I read a couple of pages every week and I get myself a small glass of bourbon and I sit on my front stoop and I can hear the kids being put to bed and I start reading the book and I just read a couple of pages. And a lot of people rationed themselves. And as they got halfway through it, they would write back to me and say, I'm really enjoying this aspect of it, or I love the journey bit of it. And is that bit true? Did you really do that? And of course, this isn't something you can do with Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or Michael Connolly because they sell so many books and they've got so many readers. But people sort of were, I suppose, building a relationship. And I kept on, I'd reply, and I've got people like Hank today who writes to me every few weeks. And they had a relationship with the book and they told me about their relationships with guitars. And then I said, well, I'm going to write this other book and I'm thinking of writing it like a novel. And most of them came back and said, I love that idea. Wouldn't it be great if I could go into the high street and buy a book about my hobby or about the thing I'm really passionate about, and it tells a story. And I thought, well, I could tell all these other stories in the form of a novel. And probably about nearly 4 years ago, I did a very, very early draft of it. And I recruited about a dozen people who'd bought my book. And I said, hey, you said you'd be interested in something like a novel. Do you want to be a beta reader? Do you want to read a very early draft of it and tell me what you think? I recruited these people. I sent them the book. They read it. They gave me lots and lots of feedback, all of it pretty positive. I'd love it if it had this. And wouldn't it be great if that happened in it? And wouldn't it be fantastic if it goes on? So I then finally got to a sort of a third draft and a fourth draft. And you write, and very rarely do you actually publish the first thing you write. There's always a rewrite. And then you come back or you wake up in the morning, you think, no, I don't think I'm happy with that. I'm going to do that again. So I spent a sort of another year or so rewriting it. And then I got very close to the point where I was going to send it off for printing. And that's when I had a bit of a brain hemorrhage and I lost my eyesight, which was a bit of a bummer. And when I regained a little of it, but what I'd regained, I realized I couldn't read. So I could identify the letters, but I couldn't turn them into words, translate them into words. And I certainly couldn't write, and I couldn't operate a keyboard. And I thought, well, that's it. I'll just put it back in the box. But then my son, who's a grown-up person in his late 30s at the time, said, I could help you. We could somehow do this together. So we then spent the next year with him reading stuff to me and me dictating stuff back to him. And we got to a sort of final draft. And by the time we got to the final draft, I knew it was going to be called The Guitar Detective. And it's a non-fiction novel, to answer your original question, because all the places are real, all the objects in it are real, all the events in it are real, and the history in it is real. So I sort of plumped on that rather awkward term of non-fiction novel. And it's a true story.
I mean, I have so many questions. How is your health doing now, and are you still able to enjoy the guitar?
Yeah, my health's good. So I've got probably about 20% of my eyesight back, which means I can now operate a computer. But as you saw, it's fairly slow, but I can do it. The guitar playing's interesting. I have so much respect for Doc Watson and Blind Lemon Jefferson and Jose Feliciano. Even though I'm a sort of semi-competent guitarist, but I never realized how much I looked at my left hand and the fretboard. Not in a sort of my finger goes here and here and here, but you're constantly flicking down to make sure you're at the 5th position or the 7th position. And I can play. But I play stuff I know. I can't learn anything new. I was never a guy who could hear a tune and then work out what it was. I always had to work with either music or tab. But no, it's a lot better. And you just get used to it. My kids always used to say, oh, I think they paraphrased Keith Richards, who said, I always wish I'd been born blind and black, and then I'd be a much better guitarist. Well, trust me, the blind bit doesn't make you a better guitarist. But it does actually, I suppose, make you work on that bit of that repertoire. And so I tend to play the same tunes, and I sort of play them not by looking at the music anymore. I do it all from memory. But that's fine.
Yeah. You mentioned the customer talking about the packaging of this book. I don't want to downplay it. This book is on par with collectible limited edition press books from, insert legendary brand or imprint. You've got this, it's beautifully bound. It comes boxed. It's like the old letterpress, which we bonded over limited edition books from 100 years ago. This is not a insignificant cost to undertake this. Why did you make the novel the same format as the Devil?
Because I thought I've called it a companion. It's not part 2, but what it does for me, it took my knowledge that I gained over probably the 5 years I was researching The Devil Is In It. And I just wanted to spin it in a slightly different way. I think if you've read The Devil Is In It, and you enjoy everything that's in that, this is just not a different spin on it, but it takes that knowledge and it builds on it, and it gets into just the passion within the guitar. I think in a way the protagonist in this book, there are 2 big characters in the book, but the protagonist really is the guitar. It's the guitar that we find at the beginning of the book that's hanging on an old wall of an old record shop with a sort of lost provenance, and it takes that and you follow that story, and it's the story of that guitar, and it's, for me, it's that belief that a guitar that's lived a life, has been owned by a few people, has been passed through different hands. It's alive. It's real. And every next person who touches it then picks up a little bit of that history. They're living that history, and so I did feel it was a companion to the Devil Is In It, and I thought, well, I could have released it as a paperback or as just a very, very simple hardback, but I think most people had collected. I thought my target audience was going to be all the people who'd bought the original book, because if you're going to take, apart from your endorsement and a couple of other endorsements, at the end of the day, you've either got to be very passionate about the guitar or very trusting to lay out $300 on a book from an unknown author. So I thought, well, I think it just needs to have that same feeling of this is part of that. And it is, they do work together. They are sort of, they play off of each other. I think the knowledge that in the Devil Is In It, and I have to be very careful how I phrase this, there was no new information. Everything that I put in it was known to other people. I mean, probably the only surprising one was the radio station that was a border blaster down in the very early days of the Grand Ole Opry. And the guy who started it was a guy who sold cures for male ailments. In fact, he used to, allegedly, he would advertise on his radio station that if you had, as a male, a problem with your equipment, then he would sell you some powder or even an operation that would solve your problem. And it was only when the government intervened and realized he was obviously a snake oil salesman or a gonad salesman that they shut him down. But that story's been out there for absolutely ages. But what I tried to do was to weave all those stories about how the guitar developed and put them in not just a chronological order, but show how they influence music, how music influenced the guitar, etc. And that was that's how it happened. The Guitar Detective is virtually a love story, another love story to the guitar, but it also tells as to why the guitar became so popular. And it was this energy within the instrument and the relationship that people have with it, how they bond with it.
You mentioned 500 of the original book. How many of those people have gone out and bought the novel?
So far, about 250.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I have all their email addresses, so they all got told. But I think it probably isn't for everybody. It's a very, very different take on it. But in a way, I've written a book that, I mean, I'd want to read this book. I'd want to read a love story about a guitar and its life. I mean, the span of the book is 100 years. So the guy who is most closely connected with the guitar, who lost it in London during the late 1950s and the early 60s, when there were an awful lot of American blues and country music and folk musicians traveling around Britain, trying to earn a living in Britain. The guy who sort of lost it lived on, but he just lived on without his guitar, and the guitar fell into other hands. And I've just told the story of that guitar, the other hands it fell into, because it lived a life. There's that, it's in the first book. Joni Mitchell talks about her beloved, the Loved One, which was her first dreadnought, which she bought off of an army captain who had returned from Vietnam. And I think the guitar got stolen and was never recovered. But she said, boy, that guitar had some stories when I got it. And I think actually everything that it went, because the captain had taken it to Vietnam and it had apparently survived his tour of duty. And I don't think he was working in a filing office in the back of Saigon. He was definitely a man in the field. And I was always sort of inspired by that story. The fact that the life that a guitar has isn't necessarily its musical life, isn't just solely its musical life. the tunes it's played. It's the many lives it's had. It's how the person raised the money to buy the guitar in the first place, and what happened in the factory when it was being made, and then its journey, and then if it got stolen, where did it go? Who owned it? And that's what the Guitar Detective is trying to do. And we're all sort of guitar detectives, because whenever you pick up an old guitar, you always wonder, I wonder what life this lived. Where did it happen? And the various things that happen in the book are telling this story about how a guitar has a life and how the people who use it have lives, and they all sort of intermingle. And that's why I decided, as I was researching the book, I've always collected old photographs. Whenever I see an old photograph in a junk shop or whatever, I always have a rummage through and normally try and buy it. And I decided that this was the book that should have photographs in it. And it's got 85 photographs in it. Some of them I took, some of them I found, some of them I acquired through their original owners. And they're not just illustrations, they're part of the text. I think the book would be, well, I don't think the book could tell its story without the photographs. And the photographs, I think, also, and certainly from the people I've always had responses from who bought the book, is that it slows you down. What happens is, you're keen to read it, but then a photograph appears and you wonder, because the photographs aren't all obvious. Some of them are a bit abstract, and some of them are about the period, but some are about other things. And a lot of people talk about, well, I just found myself sort of staring at this photo and wondering what was its story. And I talk about, I think you see a photo sometimes and it sort of hums. It's the look between the people. There's a photo somewhere in the middle of the book, and it's the whole group of musicians, and they've obviously been, a photograph captures them in a moment, and they're captured, but it's that relationship between them that's captured. And I know that photograph because I've owned it for quite a while, and I stare at that photograph so often. And I'm sort of thinking, there's the piano player and there's the singer, and it was taken in the 30s in New York. And I think, I wonder what relationship you have with each other. Were you a couple? Were you married, and were you having a fling with her? And so the photographs do slow down the way you approach the book, and it sounds a little bit up itself, and I apologize for that, but it's how you're meant to read the book. I can't tell people how to read the book, but I would advise them to read it slowly, because the book unwinds.
And maybe not beach reading, because it's a very heavy book.
And it's not very good reading in bed. I've had a lot of complaints from people saying, if only you could make a lighter version of it. It is uncomfortable to read in bed, but it's a difference between an LP, a vinyl LP, and listening to something on Spotify.
Sure.
And you know what it is. You think, if you're going to listen to an LP, you don't really want to listen to one track. You've got to make the time, and you make the time, and it's that ritual of turning up the amp, putting down the stylus, and sitting down and listening to it. And that's what this book's about. So if you haven't got any time in your life, don't buy it. Don't read it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like the fretboard journal versus scrolling on some blog post or Facebook post on your phone. I get it.
You cannot doom scroll through the fretboard journal.
Thank you. It's an interesting premise because at least when we're talking about older guitars, vintage guitars, sometimes there's a premium on one owner or, kept in closet since the 50s. You're sort of celebrating the guitar that's been passed around, that's been handed off, that maybe left the continent and came back and has some dings on it. And that's sort of an interesting pontification, just kind of reflection of like No, this guitar actually had a life. It just didn't sit in some guy's closet for the last 50 years.
Yeah. And also, one of the things, as I was researching the book, so it was very spooky. There were lots of coincidences that happened. I'd been researching vintage Gibson amps. EH-150 was a bit of a favorite. And I know you occasionally spend a moment or two thinking about vintage amps, Jason. I know
Twice a month.
You've gone down that rabbit hole and decided you want to dig a bit deeper. Anyway, there was a YouTube guy who repaired and serviced old amps. And he did a great video about an EH-150, 1937, I think. And I noticed that the amp had a metal plate on the top, and it wasn't. And I sort of watched this video so many times, and I realized this metal plate isn't a Gibson plate. It's the retailer. It's the retailer who sold it, and the retailer was in St. Louis. And I sort of kept that, stored that. But I know, St. Louis is pretty synonymous with the mafia. Mafia were got a lot of money and a lot of fingers in the music industry because of the nightclubs and drinking and prostitution. And in London, the mafia were all over Soho, where all the jazz clubs and the drinking bars and the prostitutes are. And the interesting thing about the mafia and bear with me on this for a second, mafia in London, it was the Maltese mafia that ruled the Soho in the war. And they were very vicious. They weren't so big on drugs, they were big on alcohol. And I remember I used to go to Ronnie Scott's a fair amount when Ronnie Scott was alive. And I remember going there early and chatting to Ronnie Scott. He used to always wander around in the early part, and then he'd go and have his dinner, as he call it. And I remember talking to Ronnie Scott about the mafia and the mafia's involvement in the Soho clubs and jazz clubs. And he said, I never had any trouble with them. I said, you're kidding. He said, no, because my business partner was a guy called Albert Dimes. And Albert Dimes was a St. Louis mafia gangster. So whenever any hood came in and said, can we talk to you about your license and the sorts of things that could happen if you haven't got the right protection, he said, I don't deal with that. You've got to talk to my business partner. And they said, and who's that? He said, oh, it's Albert Dimes. And they would go white because Albert Dimes was a very, very dangerous man. But he was a St. Louis gangster. And I think that's a connection with St. Louis. And then I was doing some more research and discovered that the information I wanted was in the St. Louis Library. And so I'm getting all of these connections to St. Louis. And this book is set in the 1990s, in fact, in 1990, which is just before the internet started, really, and before mobile phones. And so the whole of the book is analog. So if you want to find out something, you have to pick up the phone. And if you want to look up something, you need to look in a directory. And I thought that was interesting. And you had to use a library. You'd ring up a library. And I remember ringing up the library at the University of St. Louis Urbana and spoke to a librarian there. And I suddenly started using quite analog forms of research. I sort of stopped using the internet. So I wrote the book, sort of quite a lot of it, in a very analog fashion, phoning people, talking to people, having meetings with people, going to libraries. So it's a non-digital book. That sort of led me as well to saying, I've got to package this book in the same way as I did The Devil Is in It.
Yeah, I love it. You mentioned the guitar being the protagonist. How much do you want to tell us about the protagonist for folks who are listening to this and just want to wrap their head around what kind of story am I going to read about?
So it's a guitar that gets lost in the 50s in London. Very big, and in fact, it gets lost in a sort of a bit of a back alley of London. Not, I don't literally mean an alley. It's not London proper. It's a little bit in the suburbs, but it was a town, a suburb that had a thriving in the 50s and 60s music scene. It's a place called Richmond. So the Rolling Stones, they did all their first gigs in Richmond. Eric Clapton lived just outside of Richmond, and the Blues Breakers often played in Richmond, and Muddy Waters visited Richmond. It's a sleepy backwater that happens to have a sort of blues record. That's where the acoustic guitar gets lost. And a character sees this guitar hanging on the wall, and he's perhaps a bit like me. He's always looking at old guitars, and he buys it, and it's very difficult. It's got no labels on it. It's got nothing on the headstock, but he has a feeling that it could be a valuable guitar. And he spends the next year, the book starts on January the 1st, 1990, and finishes at the end of 1990. So it's a 12-month story. And this guy has got a few problems, and he possibly shouldn't have bought this guitar, shouldn't have paid as much money as he did, but he's now focused on trying to get his money back. And that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to actually prove this guitar once belonged to someone not famous, but interesting, and is actually a lot more than it appears to be. And so he's intent on flipping the guitar, and that's how he goes in to the story, thinking, I'm going to buy this and flip it and double my money. But it doesn't quite work out that way, because he falls in love with the guitar, but he falls in love with its life. And that's what he spends the book doing, is unraveling the life of this guitar, because he wants to find out everything about it. And the guitar cannot speak to him, but it desperately wants to tell its story. It's dying to tell its story, and not just about who played it, but where it's been, what bad things it's seen, what love it's known. And I think if you're not romantic in nature, then you probably won't enjoy it. I tell you what I found out talking to my beta readers is they all like a bit of romance. But guys, I mean, the Jack Reacher books have a very small amount of romance in them. But when you talk to people, guys, and I'm not suggesting that it's only going to be bought by guys, but I know that the bulk of the audience is male. I mean, I know I've got the names of all the people who bought the 500 books, and thank goodness a few women did buy it, because there obviously are very, very keen female guitar players out there. But I think in a way the collecting bug, the wanting to dig deeper into the history of something, I think tends to have male written all over it. And I would now probably be chased around the internet for not accepting that. I mean, there are obviously some fabulous female guitar players, but I don't think that they get quite as wrapped up in the history bit as guys do. But so, yeah, that's the sort of story. It takes a year. It's in an analog world. It's a little bit steampunk in many ways, but it just tells the story, unravels the story of this guitar. And I don't think you could do it in any other way than in a novelistic approach
Yeah.
that way. I mean, it's had 3 or 4 different versions. Before I sent it out to beta readers, I'd rewritten it 3 times in 3 different ways, and then I just said, this has got to be told as a story.
I'm going to presume that the kernel of this idea, the guitar that you saw on the wall with that infamous "not for sale" sign that we've all seen at record stores and guitar stores over the years, that probably did have a maker. The original one that you saw probably, I mean, there just aren't a lot of like no-name guitars floating around.
What's interesting about the guitar is, and so I sent some photographs of it to Dick Boak. And Dick wrote me an amazing letter, because I said, see, this guitar has got no logo on it. I took a picture of in the sound hole where it has a very distorted label. The back strip, and I sometimes forget words since my little accident, but the inside back strip, not the back, that's right, has been doctored. And as Dick said, he said, well, I've seen them put in, but I've never seen them scraped out, because most people who are trying to do a fake or do a version will be trying to put them in. And there are some brilliant fake brands in there. And he said, but that's been taken out. And it doesn't have a press on the back of the headstock with a name. And that's been doctored. And I can't figure out why anyone would want to de-brand a Martin guitar. I got that letter. And make of that what you will, Jason.
I mean, there's the novel right there.
Yeah.
So where do you go from here? Are you done? Is this like the 2 books are the bookends literally, and now you can just go back to playing guitar?
I think I am. Quite interestingly, so in January 24, so I had this thing. I went into hospital. They said, I can't see your eyesight coming back, so you're going to have to work your way around this. And the thing that most affected me, and I will try and say this without tearing up, is that I said, well, I don't mind that much. The only thing I really regret is that my 2 grandchildren will never grow old. I'll only know them as a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. I know what my wife looks like. I know what my own kids look like. And they're grown up and they're going to get a little older, but I'll be able to pitch them. But these 2 precious things, I'm never going to see them any different. Now, the good news is I gained bits of my sight back. But I suppose the thing I felt was I'm not going to be able to do anything with the book. And I had 2 book projects going. The University Press of Texas had approached me and wanted to produce an update, new edition of The Devil Is In It. And I thought it was going to take me a few months. It actually took me about a year to do the edit. And so when I came out of hospital, I had to be published by a university press. I hadn't realized this, but you go through a whole process that you don't have to with a regular publisher. So it has to have a at least 2 readers, which will be academic readers who'll read the book and give their evaluation of it, and then has to go to the faculty. And if they like what they see, and the academic readers, both of which were write a pretty full piece on the book, had been positive about it, but they still have to take a view. And we had quite a lot of work to do. And at the same time as I had to work on the Guitar Detective, we also had to do this revision of, or not revision, new version, updated version of The Devil Is In It. So that came out in September. In fact, I just had a very nice review in the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago, which was rather shockingly good, which is very, very nice to have. So I've got that out, and The Devil Is In It. So I'm thinking, is that it? The only thing I've still got are all my field notes from my road trip around America. And that's where I first met you sort of face to face, up in Northern California at that very first summit. But I'd started that trip about 4 months earlier, in fact, in New York, and I'd done that big horseshoe. And as you know, I met so many people on that trip. At the summit, I met Dave Crosby, obviously Bill Frisell, I interviewed him. Bill Collins, I interviewed, in fact, not actually at the summit. It was actually on the way down from the summit. And I met him in a cafe where he was having breakfast with Richard Hoover, who I was going on to interview. So I mean, the fretboard, that first fretboard summit, I will say it's the only one I've managed to make. It's a bloody long way to get there. And I haven't been able to do the others. And I wanted to come this year, but I just knew I couldn't do it. I walk with a white stick, and it's a pain in the backside. It's horrible. And the number of people who, I hate mobile phones, because the number of people who walk along the road reading their mobile phone and banging into you. I don't see them coming. They don't see me coming. And we have a bam. So I thought I probably wouldn't do anything else. But I thought I've still got all those road trip notes, and I built some of them into The Devil Is In It. That was a sort of the trip part of it. But I've still got in mind that there might be a final book, which is that road trip. Because that road trip was I learned so much on it. I met so many astonishing people on the whole of that loop. And I've probably published about 10% of what I did and who I met. And I think, as I said to you, I mean, I was advised by a friend who said, you've got to go and visit these places. And I went on my own, and he said, you've got to go on your own. You can't go with your wife, because you'll always be thinking, I said I'd meet her for lunch, or I said, and of course you never do, because you're talking to someone, you've met someone. And I always at the bar in a restaurant or in a hotel, and I always sat next to someone, and they all had stories. They all had stories. And so many of them, just by coincidence, had guitar stories. They're just so many of them out there. And that's what I suppose excited me to write the Guitar Detective, is that it's full of stories that I picked up. I mean, I didn't know that all these blind street musicians all had lead boys. They didn't travel on their own, but they traveled with children. That's how because they could afford to pay them a few bucks. And there was so many children who were sort of on the road with a street musician when they were 8 or 9. They'd left home and gone with the street musician. And it's, that when I discovered that was a sort of a revelation. I thought, well, of course they wouldn't wander on their own. They're on the road all the time. So I've got all of those stories, and I may put that into a final something in a year or so's time. On average, it takes me 5 years to write a book.
Well, I can understand why you're talking about the blues people with the kids. I mean, your curiosity for the nooks and crannies of guitar and music is a little bit novel and really fascinating. But most people just gravitate towards, let's play that Robert Johnson song, or here's my Martin. You kind of want to go down the back alleys.
Yeah, I'm interested in the history of the history.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually quoting from the Wall Street Journal thing. The guy said, I'm a boots on the ground kind of, I'm interested in something. And when I decided that I'd write the Guitar Detective analog, sure, I've looked up stuff on the internet, of course I have, but most of the research for the Guitar Detective, I've made phone calls. I mean, it is amazing. I rang the senior librarian at the University of Urbana library. It's an amazing library. It's got 2.5 million books. And I spent an hour on the phone with her. And she just gave me so much time. I was hunting down a music store in St. Louis. And I've been to St. Louis once. And I sort of got a feel for it. I know what it feels like. And then I phoned up another guy at a military museum. And again, it's not just, I think, because of the American character. He said, if ever you're passing by, give me a call and come and look me up, and we'll have dinner and I'll tell you all my stories. People want to tell stories. They really want to tell stories. And, we spend far too much time, as we know, on the internet, and that's a huge, great issue. But it is, this book is sort of semi-analog. I've used, obviously, a lot of computer knowledge to get to things, but my primary source has always been analog. Give them a call. And it is amazing. I mean, when I did that first road trip, everybody who I sort of managed to call, they were all very cagey. They said, yeah, you come on in, I can give you 10 minutes. And that was the George Gruen story. George Gruen said, I can give you half an hour. And that's about 12 and a half hours with him in one day. He is George Gruen. And you did warn me that if you go into the George Gruen world, it's on his terms.
Sure.
It's not, and you know that. It's not, he takes no prisoners, but he's as generous as it can be. But you've got to go there open-hearted, because he doesn't want to be hurried.
Yeah, that was a good trip to not take your wife on, that one. You've got these two monumental tomes that, I mean, I don't know what to say. People are going to have these 100 years from now, which is really quite a testament to what you've pulled off here. They've taken you years to do. You've got a family. You've had health issues. How has all of this last 10 years, has it changed your approach to guitar collecting, to what guitars you keep, to what guitars you hold on to or sell, or any of that stuff?
Yeah, it has. Yeah. I mean, I will admit, I became an accidental guitar collector. I didn't mean to. I went in as a player, and then, as anyone who's got more than 3 or 4 guitars knows, you do need more than 3 or 4 guitars. But with these, I mean, I increased my collection a little and swapped a few things round. I don't have as many guitars now because I'm getting a little bit older. I'm a little bit aware of my own mortality. And I don't particularly want to burden my family with having to shift 25 fairly expensive guitars. So I've let a few go, and I tend to fall back to my favorites, and they're pretty damn good enough for me. I've got something in my head that I do want to say to you. You've been very generous to me with advice, and you when I send you an email, I don't expect an immediate reply. As I always say to you, I always know that you're juggling. I always know that, you're not a huge operation here. You've got lots to do, but you always reply. You always give me a reply. And I'm always and I know to be patient. And I've learned to be patient over this last decade. You said something which was, I think in maybe one of the pieces when you were on the earlier podcast, and you said, "Oh, this will be a collector's thing, and this will be worth money maybe worth more than you paid for it in the future." And I didn't know what was going to happen. So they sold fairly quickly. The Devil Was in It, and I've seen a few go for sale. A couple on Reverb. I saw one on eBay. But people don't tend to want to let go of them. And a guy who bought quite recently a copy of the Guitar Detective, where I describe it as it's the companion to The Devil Is in It. And he wrote to me and he said, I have to admit, I sold my copy of The Devil Is in It. I got a bit short of cash. He obviously had overextended, and I decided to sell it, and I sold it quite handsomely, thank you. But now I've bought this, I decided it was a mistake and I wanted to get it back. And do you have any? And I said, well, I can honestly tell you, I have one. That's my copy. And I'm obviously that's not going anywhere. That's for my kids. And then he wrote back to me a few weeks later. He said, I found one. I had to pay $400 for it, but I got one back. And of course, it's got a serial number in it. So he said, who did it belong to? And I said, I really cannot tell you. But and I still have yet to write to the owner of that number. So they don't change hands much. And I assume, there's a few guys who've got more than 3 copies. What they do, one guy keeps one in each of his houses, so maybe that says something about the guy in Europe. But no, they haven't moved around much, which is nice. And I had an email from a guy a few weeks ago. He said, I'm just read it for the 3rd time.
Wow. Incredible.
I had no idea.
Well, John, I'm glad you're feeling better. I'm glad your eyesight has come back a little bit. The book both books, incredible. I'm so glad we were able to talk about them.
Thank you so much. In these difficult times, I always, when my new copy of Fretboard Journal arrives, I'm always grateful, because I think, well, it's still going, guys, and there's some. It's a dangerous world out there in the world of print publishing, but you're still doing it. And as much as I love watching, reading and having it read to me from online, my wife gets to read. I can't really read the magazine anymore. It's just a bit too difficult for me. But my wife reads it to me.
That's sweet.
Which is very sweet. I'm not certain that she's totally keen on every article. Her eyes do roll occasionally, and she's not a guitar fan. She likes hearing me play, but she's not a big fan of the instrument. But I'm just so delighted that Fretboard Journal continues.
This just adds salt on the wound, though. You've been on all these trips, you've been spending all this time writing these books, and now you're making her read to you about guitars.
There you go.
Oh, I feel bad. I feel like I should send her flowers or something. Yeah. Well, John, thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you so much, and happy season. But this may well be playing out in the new year, I know. So to everybody else listening, I hope you had a good holiday season.
right, that was John. The book is called The Guitar Detective. I'm going to include a link to John's website where you can order it. Again, this is a true keepsake book. I'm so impressed with the print quality and the writing and everything that John did in this. And I hope you enjoyed the story. If you ever have any feedback from me, podcast@Fretboard Journal is how you can reach out. We have a whole bunch of other podcasts as well. Take care of yourself. Take care of your loved ones. Thank you, as always, for tuning in.